closer by grace. All my heart is yours. All fear removed. Breathe you in and lean into your love. Oh, your love.
Now, a year ago, about this time a year ago, I really had it in my heart that during that year, 2020, that we were going to start visiting with folks whose lives could encourage us, because none of us are perfect. All of us have had bumps in the road. We've had challenges. But when we hear real life stories, it kind of encourages us. And we had a family that we've interviewed, and then COVID hit. And then that just kind of changed everything. So I'm going to go back to the last thing that I know God said to do. Not the only thing, but in this particular regard. And we're going to try to visit with 4 or 5 families this year to bring you powerful stories that will encourage you. So our guest this morning needs no introduction. So Eric and Jamie, come on up here. And yeah, go ahead and give them a big hand. And you see them up here on the platform. And yes, we are socially distanced. Normally we'd all sit at one table, but we're going to socially distance this morning. So for those of you that are watching, trying to make sure that we're following all the protocols, we're doing the best we can, okay? We're doing the best we can. Just a quick background, because I'm going to give you a quick snapshot, because we know that we could actually have a conference with all of their story. But most of you know that Eric had a career in the state police and is retired. And now he's officially a U.S. Marshal. So if you have a warrant, this is your turn to leave. No, I'm teasing. I'm absolutely teasing. Jamie is a nurse and has spent a number of years working in the ER. So having said that, I think you say those things and you don't really realize what that means. What that means in working in the ER and working in law enforcement means when the world goes crazy, they get no days off. Like for this week, and all the weather. There is no time off. There's no shutting down the hospitals. There's no shutting down the law enforcement. Now, if you bring that back into the home, think about this. You're in the ER. You're dealing with everything that comes into that ER, all the emotion, all the tragedy. Now, all the exposure to diseases and illness, which has always been there, but is now more magnified. Then you're married to someone who leaves, and you don't know if they're on the road that day and facing tragedy or danger, or for several years in the helicopter flying all over the place. And never knowing exactly what the other one was dealing with, the stresses that they're dealing with, the danger they're dealing with, the diseases they're dealing with, the threats of life that they're dealing with. And in reality, really not knowing if either one of them is going to come home, having to deal with the complexity of irregular schedules. Y'all have never known Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And all of those things, and then being in a blended family, his kids, her kids, teenagers, all the things that go into all of that, all the pressures financially. So I wanted to ask them this question. How on earth did you handle the stress of the jobs and family? And what did you find that worked and what didn't work?
Well, let me first start by explaining about my job right now. As I sit here right this minute, I am not a U.S. Marshal. So let me explain that. I started my career I was sworn in here at Malvern Police Department December 6, 1990. I worked for them for 2 years, and then I switched over to the Sheriff's Office in January 1st, 1993. Worked for them for almost 2 years, and then the state police hired me. And I worked for the state police until July 1st, 2019 is when I retired. So I retired with 28 and a half years law enforcement. I recently started in November. What I tell everybody is I am a security contractor for a federal security company that is assigned or contracted to the U.S. Marshals Judiciary Security Division. What we do is we are the protection for the federal judges in the federal court system. And so my title, what I'm sworn in with as the U.S. Marshals, my title is a Special Deputy United States Marshal. And what that means is when I'm at my work on duty, I am a U.S. Marshal. The minute I walk out of the building, wherever I'm assigned to work, then I'm no longer a U.S. Marshal. They don't trust us old retired cops.
Then you're charged with taking care of Rick, right?
Yes.
No, okay.
But anyway, getting back to your question, that's a very good question. It's a really good question, and I think we're going to have to circle back to you on that one, Rick. So for almost probably to give you a little background, very little snapshot, for probably almost the first half of mine and Jamie's marriage, which this coming September will be 20 years, God was not at the front of our marriage. He was not at the focus of our marriage. He was not really at the focus of mine for pretty much all that time, and hers for a big part of that time. The way it worked for us back then when we first got together, at that time I was working as a state trooper full-time. I was driving a sweeper truck at night, occasionally doing Walmart parking lots, cleaning Walmart parking lots, working for my stepbrother on the side. And I was also doing some lawn care stuff on the side. So I was working 3 jobs. So the way it kind of worked for us, I have one son. She has a son, 2 daughters, my stepkids. They're all roughly 2 years apart, and they were all teenagers pretty much at the same time, living in a house with 1 bathroom. But anyway,
that's got to be a story within itself.
Yeah, we can do a whole day on that one. But so the way it kind of worked for us in the beginning and for a good while was I worked all the time, and so that was my focus was working, trying to support our family, our new blended family. Jamie dealt with the kids. She worked some jobs along the way occasionally, but primarily she dealt with the kids and all their needs. We both were very busy because of that, and it just somehow worked out for us for years, sort of. It led to problems down the road, problems that we didn't know were occurring at the time, but that's kind of the way it worked. I, at one point, got the flu, and while I was sick with the flu and off work I think I was off work for almost 2 weeks. It's the worst case of flu I've ever had in my life. We kind of did some reflecting and realized that at that point, for probably about 3 years, I never slept more than 4 hours at a time because of all my jobs. My sweeper truck job was usually done in the middle of the night. And we realized at that point I had gone about 2.5 years without a single day off from at least one of my jobs. From at least, I always had to do at least one of my jobs every day. And so on top of having the flu, I'm sure I was just exhausted. At some point in there, Jamie came to me after that, told me she wanted to go to nursing school. And I literally, the day she came and told me that, I told her, I said, I'm really glad to hear that, because I've been trying for the last 2 weeks to think of how to tell you that I can no longer do this. It's literally killing me. And I can't keep up the 3 jobs trying to support us. But when she told me that, I told her, I said, if I can see a light at the end of the tunnel, I can keep going long enough to get you through school. So that's what we did. Now, later on, Jamie turned her focus back to God, which was her upbringing. It was not so much mine. And those of you that have been here a long time, you probably remember my testimony. I went many, many years basically running from God instead of running toward Him. But Jamie started to focus on God again. She started getting back in the church, started out with some other churches. It eventually led here to Lifepoint. She got on the worship team. I started coming to Lifepoint strictly to support her and listen to her sing. Initially, I was not coming because I felt drawn to come to church or drawn to God or anything like that. I was strictly coming to listen to her sing. I've said for many years that she's my saving grace. Rick's a big part of that. Lifepoint Church is a big part of that, and Gateway Church is a big part of that, because you'll remember from my testimony that in 2009, the worship team, the majority of the worship team and Rick went to Gateway Church for a worship conference, and there was a pastor's conference jointly with it. At that time, Gateway Church would allow the spouses of worship team members to come for free. So Jamie came to me, asked me if I would go. I initially told her no. And I think it ended up being kind of a combination of her and Rick kind of talking to me, and I finally basically just gave in and was like, okay, I'll go. I remember telling Rick on the way down there that most of my life I've had a bad opinion of really big churches, mega churches. So I was going down there very skeptical, and I got down there, and it was it 3 days, 4 days?
Something like that. Mm-hmm.
I was completely overwhelmed with the presence of God that was there, and the people that were there, and it just completely overwhelmed me. And I think it was about day 2 or 3 that Pastor Robert Morris was up front talking. I think it was I don't remember, might have been, I think it was the evening service that day. Anyway, he got up and he said, all right, he said, anybody here that has been feels like you're in some kind of spiritual battle, I want you to stand up right now. And I had been in a spiritual battle over myself, running from God for many, many years at that point. And I know looking back it's not the case, but at the time I just thought it was God telling me, all right, Eric, I'm throwing everything out at you here to get you back finally. This is your last shot. And so I stood up along with many other people there that night and rededicated my life to God that night. But once we got back on track somewhat and we put God first, I think for me, what it made me realize was, I had along with basically telling Jamie, hey, you deal with the kid stuff and I'll work and make as much money as I can. I had also told her, you deal with the financial stuff. I'm working, I don't have time to deal with it. I'm working so many jobs, you just deal with it. As long as, and I think I told her something along the lines of, I don't care how much money you spend, just as long as we get the bills paid. And yeah, hindsight's 20/20. But I think once we got on track, we put God first each other as an individual, and then we put Him first in our marriage. I think what it did for me is it made me realize that, hey, even if I'm that busy, which luckily I've slowly weaned off of that, but I need to be a part of those decisions. I need to know what's going on. I need to support her, help her. For the longest time, we just kind of both did our own thing in the marriage, and I think when we finally turned back to God, both of us, and got on the same page, it drew us back together. It made us much closer as a couple. And I don't know, you can add something at this point. Yes. Well, I've unmuted your mic at this time.
I mean, he's pretty much covered it all. It was a struggle because we did grow up so differently. I grew up in church. I went to a private Christian school. He went to public school. We both had parents that divorced, so we did have that in common. But we had completely different parenting skills. His was almost non-existent. He just kind of pushed everything away, and I was involved in every aspect of everything, and at the school, and constantly doing everything I could to be a part of the kids' lives. And they became number one. They were number one. God wasn't number one. He wasn't number one. The kids were number one. And when they're young, they kind of have to be when they're completely dependent on you, but not really. And it took a lot of years for me to reorganize that process. And even still, sometimes now, even though they're in their 20s and one is 30, we tend to forget that they are adults, and I tend to forget they're adults, and I put them before everything else still, even before him. And then having grandbabies, of course, they get way up in the top. So, but our struggles were a lot because of the way we were raised and our beliefs. I mean, my beliefs never went away, even though I wasn't going to church actively. I wanted to be in church. I tried several times throughout the first several years of our marriage to get him to go to church. I'd beg him. I'd be like, please go, please go. And he would go and he would be miserable, and it was awful, and I hated it. And it was just crazy because when I came here in 2007, when did you come in 8?
8.
Yeah, so I was here, I came in the first year. I actually just started going to the youth stuff with my kids because I'd never been to a non-denominational church, so I didn't know what that was, and I was kind of afraid of what they might say to my kids or do to my kids. I grew up in a very, I was Baptist, very strict Baptist. And so I loved it. I loved being in with the youth. I loved the youth pastor. I loved Bob and Brenda and mostly Bob. I didn't meet a lot of the people that were here in the church because I was with the youth. But through coming here, I remember one night I was getting ready to come to a Wednesday night service, and he goes, where are you going? I was like, to church. I didn't ask him to come. I didn't want him to come because I didn't want him to be miserable, and I didn't want to be miserable with him, so I was going to come to church. And I think that was probably one of the turning points for him, was like, oh, well, something's changed here. Something's different. Let me go see what's going on. And then, it just grew from there. And the situation he was talking about when we were at Gateway, I went down there with these great expectations. Like, he didn't. He was miserable and didn't want to be there and all of that because his grandpa name is Grumpy, and he was grumpy then too. So he didn't want to be there, but he honestly needed to drive me because I worked weekend nights. I worked ICU and ER. That's the main parts of my career as a nurse, and it is extremely stressful, but he had to drive me. I'd worked, and we came to church, and I literally slept on the way down there. And I remember just being there, and they were having a prayer, and we'd all stood up in that moment that he was talking about. I didn't know he'd stood up. I had my eyes closed, and I'm like literally griping at God, like, where's this big epiphany? Where's this thing that's supposed to happen? I'm like, I'm supposed to feel this, and it's supposed to be all this stuff because I'd heard from the other people who had been before. And then for whatever reason, I don't think God actually told me to open my eyes, but I did. And I saw his hands raised, and I saw him standing, and it was just like this slap in the face of, it's not about you. And I was like, whoa. But it ended up being about me because it brought us back to where we needed to be, or not back, to where we needed to be, or it started us on that path. So
here's what I hadn't thought about that story, but here's what I remember about the story, other than Eric not wanting to go, was we walked in that night, and all of us were tired because we left right after church. You had worked all weekend. Nearly everybody else had worked. We were all extremely tired. There was probably 10 or 12 of us that went. And we walked in, and the praise and worship, and it was one of those nights that you could just, it didn't matter how tired you were, you felt it.
Oh, yeah.
And all I remember was, I am really tired, and I know I love worship, and I know I love 30, 40 minutes of worship, and especially in a service like this, but I really need a Whataburger. And so that's what I was thinking. And I looked over, and Eric's gone. I mean, tears are coming down his face, and I'm going, okay, die to self, let God work. So we come back, both of you now have a focus on God. The same stressors are there. The teenagers are still being teenagers. They're working on their testimony, as I often say about our kids. And all those things are still going on. You still got all the stress. Now what changed in how you handled problems?
Well, like I said, we started communicating a lot better and trying to work together instead of each trying to do our own thing. And I don't know, I don't know that it was so much that we were like, okay, here's how this needs to work. I just think it's when we turned our focus to God and we put God first, both in our own lives and in our marriage and our family life, it just ended up working out this way, and it seems like it works that way to this day for us anyway, and that is that for the longest time, my biggest stress was our financial situation, because we lived like many people did or do back then, from paycheck to paycheck. And for me, there was 3, and at one point I even picked up a 4th job. So I was getting lots of different paychecks, and they weren't really.
But you told her to spend whatever she wanted to spend.
In not so many words, yes, and she did.
Very good at it.
But I think what God did for us, and you know, when we look back, when God wasn't our focus, and what we both have shared with each other about our own lives and things that are going on in that time right now, it's a very big wonder that we didn't end up divorced. And I truly think that God was there doing whatever he was doing at the time, because he knew there were bigger and better things down the road for us as a couple. And so what it seems like he does for us now is, and it's still mostly me that gets stressed out about finances at times, is that if I get stressed out about finances or whatever it is, she seems to be really calm and cool about it, and so it helps offset that. And there's been a handful of times, not even a handful probably, but there's been a few times that it's reversed, and she's gotten completely stressed out about the finances and stuff, and she was completely shocked, because when she finally came to me and was like, hey, I'm really stressed, she was afraid to come to me because she knows how stressed out I get about finances. And when she came to me, I literally was like, don't worry about it, God's got this. God will take care of us. Yeah. Literally. Never been that way. I'd never been that way in my whole life.
The first time he actually did that was even before we were in church here. It was actually when I was still in nursing school, and I came to him and told him how much debt we were actually in. And I had talked with one of my friends that I was in school with, and I was like, he's going to divorce me when he finds out how much debt we have. Like, he has no clue. At that time, it was $60,000 in credit card debt.
So how did you get out of that? Because there wasn't money just started falling with new jobs at that point. But
no.
So what changed?
Well, okay, so that would have been about 2004. It was not 2004, 2006. I graduated from nursing school in 2006, and Dave Ramsey would shoot us. He was working 4 jobs at the time. He was doing the mowing, the sweeping, the state police, and he was doing a security position. And he decided to leave the security position. It really was off season. I graduated in December, so it was really off season for the mowing, but there were some random things he could do. So he was down to 2 jobs, and he was like, okay, we maxed our credit cards out. Insane. So he could quit his jobs. We maxed our credit cards out, paid for Christmas, paid the bills up, did whatever we could do, and so he could sleep, and it still took him years to even be able to sleep more than 3 or 4 hours. I graduated. I started work in January after I graduated, and in February I had my first surgery. My second surgery was in March. I was an orienting nurse and couldn't work. That was probably there must have been 3 times, because I kind of freaked out about the fact that we didn't have any money, and I had just started this job, and I was supposed to have this income to pay these bills, and I had student loans. So the student loans ended up getting put on credit cards, because the dates that the student loans came out were before paychecks came, and so we ended up with $80,000 in credit card debt at that point. And in 2009, when we were at Gateway, and I was dead tired because I had worked all night and been awake most of the day other than the driving, or a little bit in the driving, and when we stopped at Whataburger, and I sinned against all kinds of sins and ordered chicken. But anyway, the look on his face was great. Anyway, I got up and went to the restroom because I literally fell asleep while the pastor of Hillsong was preaching. Oh my gosh, I fell asleep while he was preaching. It was great. Not really. I got up and I went to the restroom and was wandering around. Well, Gateway's this huge mega church. They have a bookstore. And in the front of the bookstore is this book, and it's Dave Ramsey. Never heard of Dave Ramsey. Total Money Makeover. I was like, ooh, I need that. I bought it on credit card. Dave Ramsey would shoot me for that one too.
Yep, he
but
would.
it was 75% off, so I only paid like $6 for it. So anyway, we get home from the conference and everything's so different as far as like the emotional and the spiritual and everything. And I read this book, and y'all, I can literally read a 700-page book without getting up and doing anything. Like, I go into another world. That book's less than 200 pages, and it took me weeks to read it. It was so boring, really boring, okay? And I was mad because I was like, I know all this stuff. We always had a budget. We just didn't have the money to pay the bills because I bought clothes for my kids. And anyway, I got done reading the book, and I handed him the book, and I said, you have to read this book because we have to be on the same page, and we're going to do this, and we're going to get out of debt. And he pretended like he read the book, but he didn't. I think he moved the bookmark occasionally or something, and then finally the book ended up somewhere. I sat down, though, and I wrote out a budget. This was 2010 at this point because it was fall going into winter. It took a while to get the budget figured out. And once I really figured out where all the money needed to go and everything, I hand wrote a weekly budget for 7 years because that's how long it was going to take us to pay all the credit card debt off. We paid our credit card debt off in 4 years. I worked.
And how much was it?
$80,000.
$80,000 in 4 years.
$80,000.
On top of your other normal
On
living.
top of the other bills. Now, that's not car payments. That's just credit card debt. That's what we had, cash advances, clothes for the kids, whatever. It was so exciting to cut up each credit card as I paid them off. And I wouldn't cut it up until it was paid off because, cutting it up doesn't mean anything when there's still a bill owed to it. But I literally hand wrote a 7-year budget, and I mean within months I was having to rewrite it again. I wish I'd have kept that initial budget.
I remember looking at that. I thought, this woman is crazy. Look at this.
It was
pages of it.
I mean like cramps in my hands, and I would stay up like I didn't sleep. I was so excited to see the balances going down. Like, I love budgeting. If you want a budget done, I will do it for you. I'm excited.
Can you please see my wife after
Yes,
service?
I love
Okay,
math.
Thank you.
I love basic math, and especially paying bills off. But it took us 4 years. I worked, at one point I took on a second job, and I actually worked Monday through Thursday days at a clinic in Little Rock, and then I worked Friday night, Saturday night. So I had half a day off on Friday to pay bills, do whatever, go to the doctor or take kids to the doctor. And I had after church on Sunday because I worked Saturday night, came to church. I didn't sleep. Now, sometimes I did fall asleep on the couch before church and didn't make it for worship, but it didn't happen that often. But I usually left as soon as worship was over because if I'd have sat down, I'd have been drooling on myself. I'd have been, because that was literally I had 2 half days off, and I did that for 18 months. And because obviously the money I was making as a nurse was more than what he was making with his part-time jobs. So I did that, and that still didn't, it took care of half of the debt at that point. But he made a really crazy purchase in 2013. He comes in and he wakes me up. I brought home I couponed, I did all kinds of stuff.
We were within a year of having everything but the house paid off.
Yeah.
And so we had somewhat started discussions of once we got all that paid off, we had at this point, we had never even gone on vacation together, ever, as a couple, since we'd been married or anything. So we had somewhat started talking about once we got all that everything but the house paid off, that we both would really like to possibly get a camper so that we could have time to go somewhat on vacation with each other on a regular basis, that kind of thing. So that's what led up to this.
So I had brought home, it was a Sunday, went to church, came home, brought home a Sunday paper for the coupons, and he comes and he wakes me up. Y'all, he's lucky he's alive. He woke me up and he was like, I don't even remember Lone Oak or something. I gotta go look at this. And he's telling me all about it. I was like, whatever, just leave. You know, I'm trying to sleep. I got to go to work here in a little bit, because at that point I was working Saturday nights, Sunday nights. So anyway, because I'd left the other job, the Monday through Thursday job. But anyway, he goes and he's like, we buy a camper, okay? We're still
not just a camper.
We bought a camper and a truck.
It was
that we didn't have money for, Dave Ramsey.
I had been in hopes for what was coming in the future, a year down the road, already been researching campers and what we might or might not want when it came to that time. And so that Sunday, while she was sleeping, I don't remember if your kids were gone. I think, yeah, they were gone over to your ex's house, and my son wasn't there, so it was just me at the house, and I got bored. Sunday afternoon, there wasn't anything good on TV, whatever, so I was like, you know, what can I do? And I saw she had brought the state paper home, and I was like, oh, okay, well, here's a state paper. I've been researching campers online, and I kind of know prices and that stuff, what they are now. I'll just look in the want ads and see what they're running in the want ads compared to online. And so I flip over to the recreational vehicle section, and the third ad down, I remember it distinctly. It had a big check mark at the top of the ad, and it said, so it was check this out. And so I start reading it, and we're talking about a camper that you can pull with a half-ton pickup, which is what I had at the time, something big enough for mostly just for me and her, but maybe that we could get the kids in if they wanted to come out. But anyway, so it was a Cardinal 34 TS, which I knew what that was. It was a fifth wheel camper. The 34 Minute was 34 feet long. It was a fifth wheel. The TS Minute had triple slide outs on it. It's a big camper.
It's a house.
Yes, it was a 2006 model, I think, that described what all it had in it, and it said basically that it was still like brand new. And then after it described it, it had W/ for width, Dodge 1-ton pickup, dually pickup. And then it had the price, $25,000, or it was a 2008 Dodge 1-ton dually pickup. Then it had the price, $25,000. Well, I didn't know, other than a Dodge 1-ton, 2008 Dodge 1-ton pickup, that's all it said about the truck. I was pretty sure the truck, depending on the shape of it, was probably worth that much money. I knew from my research that the camper was worth that much money. So when I first read it, I thought, okay, this is a misprint. It's $25,000 for each or something to that effect, and so I sat there and I was like, and you just have to know, for not that I ever needed one, but I always wanted a Dodge dually diesel pickup. So I literally sat there like, okay, is this a mistake? Should I call these people? We can't really afford this right now, but can we afford to pass this up because it's worth twice what they're asking for it, if that's what they're really asking for it? I sat there for 30 minutes debating on this. And I finally was like, you know what, this could be an elderly woman who's lost her husband, and she can't do anything with this stuff, and she just wants to get rid of it. So I finally talked myself into just calling the number and asking them, because I was debating waking her up saying, should I even call this number? And so I finally called the number, and it was an elderly man that answered the phone. And told him, why I was calling. He said, yes, I've still got it. We bought the camper brand new. It's an 06 model. We bought it brand new in 07. We bought it while we built our house, so we lived in it for 6 months here while we built our house. And then we kept it, intending to use it, but my wife, shortly after we got the house built and moved into it, her health got bad, and it's just sat here and we've never used it. It's just like brand new, And he said the truck, he initially had a 3/4 ton truck. He didn't think it was really big enough to pull the camper. The place he bought the camper from had this 1-ton dually, so he went back, bought it from them, and he had that ever since. And he said, I literally drive it back and forth to work now, just, a few miles each day. And I said, okay. I said, well, how many miles does the truck have on it? Oh, it's 60,000. I'm thinking he's going to tell me it's got 200,000-300,000 miles on it. And so my jaw almost hit the floor. I literally you know, I had it planned in my mind once I kind of got the few details of saying, okay, well, your ad says you're asking $25,000. Is that for both, or is that a mistake, or what is that? And when he told me the truck only had 60,000 miles on it, I literally couldn't think of what to say at that point, and I was sitting there on the phone going, and I looked down at the ad, and I was like, oh yeah, one more question. Your ad says that $25,000. Is that for both? And before I could even finish that sentence, he said, yes, that's for both of them. He said, we only owe a few $1,000s on the camper. The truck's paid off. We're not ever going to do anything with it. We just want to sell it to somebody that can use it.
So he goes to the bank the next day and gets a loan for it. And we never went camping in it. We actually put money into it because the roof had to be redone. It had basically dry rotted or whatever.
We had planned a camping trip in it, and leading up to that weekend, the weekend before, I got up on it because it had some leaves and stuff on the roof of it. I got up on the roof to clean the roof off, sweep the roof off, and all the vents, everything like that on the top of the camper. I could tell when I got up there looking at it, it had not been kept under a cover. That was the only thing about it that showed any wear and tear, was it had a little sun fade on the outside. Anyway, when I got up there, I could tell the vents and stuff looked pretty dry rotted, so I tried to be real careful around them. I accidentally just barely brushed one, literally with the bristles of the broom I was sweeping the roof off with, and the corner of it just crumbled into pieces, fell apart.
So we put money into it. We cleaned it all up and everything, and never took it camping. And about a year later, we'd been making payments on it about 10 or 11 months at that point. We were sitting there, and we had about $30,000 left in credit card debt, plus that debt. And, you know, I told him, I was like, every time that bill comes in, I was like, you know, I know God's money is endless. It's totally endless. You know, so every time that credit bill comes in, I just pray that there's a zero balance. I've learned my lesson. At this point, it's been 5 years, almost 4 years that we hadn't used a credit card. We were working really hard to pay all the debt off and everything, and we're just talking about it, and he looks at me and he goes, well, what if our zero balance is out there in the yard? And man, I was mad because I knew he was right, but I wanted to go camping. And we turned around and we sold it like within a week or so, I think, and paid off the credit card debt.
We sold it for $42,500, I think it was. The truck and camper together, or was it $45,000?
I don't know, but at that point, we actually ended up with enough money for my brothers to paint the house that we were living in. Also,
I had gotten promoted at that time and was going to have to move. We were going to have to move to Nashville, Arkansas.
Yep, and so we were trying to decide if we were gonna. I was going to stay at the house because our youngest was still in school. She was about to turn 18, but she was a senior, and we were trying to decide if we needed to move the camper down there, if we needed to find a place to rent, you know, all these things, because if we would have rented a place, then we would have had a house payment, a rent payment, and a camper payment, and you're talking about basically 3 house payments. And so we decided to sell it, and we were able to pay the credit card debt off and everything, and it just kind of went from there. But one of the things that I didn't mention when I was talking about our budget was tithing, and that's kind of a backtrack there, but we didn't bring in enough money to tithe 10%. We just didn't. And I mean, I tried to make the budget work. I took grocery money. I took everything, all the extra that I could. I wasn't going to make my kids not be involved in the things they were involved in school. But I mean, I even cut out going to the ball games and going to, you know, and food and making sure they ate before they went so they wouldn't spend money at the ball games. But I think initially we were giving about 4 to 5% of our income in offerings, tithes, whatever you want to call it. And I had this really weird situation come up. I was sitting up working on the budget, and I came to church. It was on a Saturday night. I don't know why I was off. I got put on standby or something because census was low in ICU. And I came to church, and I was telling Rick, I was like, I was watching one of those pastors on TV that tells you to send them money, and God didn't tell me to send him any money. But I was like, I swear God's telling me that we need to give the church $10,000. And I'm like, we don't have $10. We don't have 10 cents to give, you know. And he was like, well, do you think he's, you know, over the year? And I'm like, no, I really feel like he wants me to write a check. And I'm like, but that's not reality. So he said, just think on it. Just work on it. Well, as we paid bills off, each time I increased to where we could at least be giving our 10% of our income for tithes. And that year we actually gave $12,000 to the church. And God, I mean, he gave it back to us. Our taxes that year, we've never gotten a refund like this before. We got $10,000 back in taxes that year. It was total faith, total believing that, you know, what we gave was given back to us. I never expected that kind of a return. I never, you know, and that's not why we gave our tithes. It's, I was brought up that way. You tithe, that's what you're supposed to do. And that was the first time that I'd ever truly seen how blessed you are by giving that. But it was so exciting to actually be able to give that 10% and then make it 12% and then 13%. And each time we paid off, I increased it just a little bit more, not because I wanted God to give me something back. It was just, I was so excited to not have that debt, that I could give it back to God and it could be used somewhere else. And that was a struggle for him because he wasn't brought up with tithe and all of that. That just, he said, we even talked about it. He's like, I don't even remember them ever talking about it when I was a kid. I just remember my mom and dad throwing a few dollars in the plate when it went by.
Yeah, we actually had a few arguments over
We did, too.
tithing before I knew
Yeah.
the you know, what you were supposed to give. And then once we got to that point where we were giving that, I actually, just like the story she just told, I started seeing the fruits from it. And I, you know, there's been a couple times over the years since that something's come up that we've ended up in some type of a bind, and she's actually asked me, you know, should we do tithes this week, or should we skip because we've got this, and this? And I've been like, no, we got to tithe.
And I'll be honest, during the really rough times with COVID, there was 3 months we didn't give at all. I mean, neither one of us had a job at the time. I was trying to get hired on, but I was really leery about going to work. I actually left a job because of the lack of following the rules with COVID. I was really worried to go back to work and work as a nurse because I didn't want to bring something to our grandbabies. And we had a brand new grandbaby that came in April. And I was going to be the one responsible for the older two, which are babies too. So I left the job, and so for 3 months I didn't work at all. And he was trying to find something part-time. So for 3 months we didn't give, and that hurt. Like that was hard. I mean, and God didn't punish us. Like nothing happened, nothing bad happened. He knew the situation, and he knew we were still going to be faithful when we had it. Part of the reason we weren't able to, I mean, he brings in enough money with his retirement, but our youngest daughter went back to cosmetology school, and I had made a deal with her because I wanted her to finish school. I wanted her to do something, and I made a deal with her that I would pay her bills while she was in school, her car payment and her insurance and everything. Didn't tell him until just a couple of months ago, and she's about to finish. But I actually made that deal with her like 2 years ago. I was like, if you'll just go back to school, if you'll do this, I'll make sure your bills are paid, because I wanted her to do this. And anyway, so that was part of the strain, but I wasn't going to back out on a deal I had made with her and make her not be able to be what she wanted to be. And she just passed her boards. So,
Yeah. So here's what I hear you saying. You're going through life, all the wrinkles that a lot of people go through, you guys are going through. Eric, you make a decision to put God first, not knowing what that means. You make a decision, you're going to put God first in finances. The storms did not end immediately. In fact, they continue. But you know that you have faith in God. You're going to trust Him, because you're already sunk anyway.
oh yeah.
You're already done. And so your only hope is to trust Him. And little by little, as the Scripture says, line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little, you work your way out. Marriage but it gets better. Things start working out. It's not perfect. There's setbacks. What seemed like was going to be an albatross of buying your dream truck and camper turned out to be a great financial blessing. And so, little by little, God got you out of it. So, in 30 seconds or less, because I know they're wanting to go home because it's going to snow.
Sorry,
It's
y'all.
snowing. Is what would you tell another couple going through stress? What would you tell them to do?
Look, you've got to, like we ended up doing, first you've got to put God first in your own individual life. And this, me and Jamie talked about this. This wouldn't have worked if both of us had not done that individually leading up to us doing it as a couple. We had to do that first. We had to get right with God individually. And so you've got to get right with God individually. Then you can get right with God as a couple or a married couple. And you've got to keep God first. It's easy, when you start your walk with God, a lot of people think, well, here's God and here's you and you're doing your walk. Well, most people are like me. Your walk's like this. God stays where he's at, but you do this right here. You're close to him and you drift away, and you're close and you drift away, and it's a constant. You constantly have to remind yourself to focus on God, to let God deal with the issues. I'm not saying you just forget about your finances, whatever. You've got to do your part, but you've got to make God first. God's got to be first in everything.
And the only other thing I would add to that is you don't necessarily have to be like, confess your sins and everything will be all right and everything. God's going to meet you where you're at. I mean, he came to church for the wrong reasons. I really came to church just to make sure my kids stayed involved in church. And, I wasn't coming here for the right reasons. And in the beginning, and, God still met us where we were and continued that path to bring us to where we are now. And it's a struggle even now. We have issues. We're not perfect, and we don't really argue that much, but occasionally I lose my mind and say some stuff, and he just sits there and stares at me, and that makes me even more mad. But we aren't perfect, and we mess up, and we struggle. We struggle to put God first in our marriage and in our individual lives, because life gets in the way. The more people that come into your life, grandkids and spouses of your kids and things like that, I mean, there's just distractions everywhere, and you have to stay focused. But again, God's going to meet you where you're at. You don't have to be fixed. He's gonna fix you. You come to him broken as you are.
So whether you're here or whether you're watching online, the big thing is you have to make God Lord, not just Savior. You have to make him Lord. You have to let him be your manager, your guide, the consultant, your counselor, the Prince of Peace. You have to let him do that. And so you have to do that individually. And now this is Valentine's weekend. So if you're married and you're here with your spouse, just grab a hold of their hands. Those of you that are watching online, listen to me for a second. You're listening to a couple that this has been a journey. And all of us have the same story around the building. It's different circumstances, but it's the same thing. We had to make a decision to make him the Savior. On Valentine's Day, I got my wife more chocolate this weekend than ever before. I didn't know I did, but she told me that I bought her more chocolate. I think she thinks I have an ulterior motive. But anyway, she had more chocolate than she's ever had before. But she's worth more chocolate than ever before. But she and I had to make a decision individually and as a couple. Listen, I'm going to pray for you, but let this Valentine's Day be beginning of a new love, a new kindling, a new fire, a new desire in couples, but especially for the Lord, because he loves you.